If you enjoy powerful emotional stories about relationships, truth, and the moments that change people forever, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Stories like this one remind us that sometimes the hardest nights of our lives become the moments that teach us the most about love, trust, and the courage to face the truth. Daniel Hart never imagined that one ordinary evening would spiral into a night that would challenge everything he believed about his marriage. As he drove through the freezing rain on a dark Vermont road, his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than he realized. The windshield wipers scraped rhythmically across the glass, fighting a losing battle against the icy rain that blurred his vision. But the storm outside the car wasn't the only one raging. Inside his mind, the argument with his wife Emily replayed again and again like a broken recording that refused to stop. Every sentence they had exchanged felt sharper in memory, every word heavier. What began as a small misunderstanding had somehow grown into something far more painful. Neither of them had intended it to escalate, yet somehow it had. Daniel could barely remember what started the disagreement. All he could remember was the way Emily's voice had cracked when she spoke, and the way his own frustration had pushed him to say things he wished he could take back. Before things became worse, he had walked out. Not because he wanted distance from her, but because he was afraid that if he stayed, he might say something that would damage their marriage in ways that couldn't be repaired. The cold wind outside howled as his car rolled slowly down the lonely road. The heater struggled weakly, barely pushing out warmth. Fog gathered along the edges of the windshield, forcing Daniel to wipe it away with the back of his sleeve. The roads were slick with ice. The storm had arrived faster and stronger than expected. Several times he had pulled over just to breathe and calm his racing thoughts. Each time he considered turning back home. But the truth was he didn't trust himself yet. He needed time. Time to think. Time to cool down. Time to remember why he loved Emily in the first place. Another gust of wind shook the car. Daniel exhaled slowly and glanced ahead through the storm. That was when he realized something unsettling. Driving home safely might not be possible tonight. The roads were getting worse. The visibility worse still. He needed somewhere close to stay until morning. And there was only one place nearby. A small wooden cabin several miles ahead. It belonged to Emily's mother, Margaret. Daniel hesitated at the thought. Margaret had always been kind to him. In many ways, she had treated him like family from the very beginning. Still, showing up in the middle of a storm, soaked, upset, and clearly fresh from an argument with her daughter. That felt embarrassing. But the storm made the decision for him. 30 minutes later, Daniel's car rolled slowly into the gravel driveway outside the quiet cabin. Rain hammered the roof of the vehicle as he shut off the engine. The porch light glowed warmly through the darkness. For a moment he simply sat there, hands resting on the wheel, heart heavy. Part of him considered turning around and trying to drive home anyway. But another blast of freezing wind rattled the car, reminding him how dangerous the roads had become. Finally, he stepped out into the rain and hurried to the porch. Water soaked through his coat instantly. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door opened. Margaret stood there, framed by warm light from inside the cabin. Her short silver hair was tucked neatly behind her ears, and concern filled her eyes the moment she saw him. "Daniel," she said softly. He must have looked miserable. Soaked clothing, pale face, shaking hands from the cold. Without asking questions, she pulled the door open wider. "You're freezing," she said gently. Within seconds he was inside, the warmth of the cabin wrapping around him like a blanket. The scent of lavender drifted through the air, and the soft crackle of a fireplace filled the room. Daniel hadn't realized just how cold he was until that moment. Margaret guided him closer to the fire and handed him a towel. "Sit," she insisted. He obeyed, still catching his breath. Eventually he explained in broken sentences. The argument. The storm. The dangerous roads. Margaret listened quietly, her expression calm and understanding. When he finished, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing coming here," she said. "Tonight you rest." Those simple words eased something inside him. For the first time that night, Daniel felt the tension in his chest loosen slightly. But a few minutes later Margaret returned from the hallway looking apologetic. "There's just one small problem," she admitted. The guest room was currently under renovation. The couch Daniel normally slept on had broken the week before. And in a small cabin like this one, there simply weren't many options. Daniel immediately said he could sleep on the floor. Margaret crossed her arms. Absolutely not. The roads are dangerous, she said firmly. And you are not sleeping on the floor like some kind of stray traveler. She paused. There's only one option. Daniel blinked. You'll sleep in my room. The bed is big enough. The suggestion stunned him. Not because there was anything improper about it, but because the night already felt overwhelming enough. Margaret seemed amused by his reaction. Daniel, she said with a gentle smile. You're practically family. You're like a son to me. And I'm not letting you freeze when there's a perfectly warm bed available. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls. Daniel sighed. She was right. A few minutes later they stepped into her bedroom. The room felt warm and peaceful. Soft lamplight illuminated the wooden walls. The bed was large, covered with thick blankets. Margaret arranged extra pillows between them and insisted he get comfortable. Still awkward, Daniel sat at the edge of the mattress. His mind was still full of thoughts about Emily. Margaret noticed the exhaustion on his face. You look like you're carrying too much, she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. Because if he did, he might fall apart. Eventually they lay down beneath the blankets. The cabin fell silent except for distant thunder and the quiet hum of the heater. There was nothing romantic about the situation, but there was a kind of simple human closeness. Two people sharing warmth. One hurting, the other offering quiet support. Daniel stared at the ceiling, thinking about his marriage, thinking about Emily, thinking about whether he had already pushed things too far. Then Margaret spoke again. Daniel, she said gently, there's something I think you should know about Emily. His heart skipped. The tone of her voice carried weight. Something serious. Something important. Daniel turned slightly, his mind racing. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. But before Margaret could continue, a soft sound echoed through the cabin. Knock. Both of them froze. Another knock followed. Gentle. Hesitant. Margaret sat up slowly. Who would come here this late? She whispered. Daniel's heart suddenly pounded. A strange instinct filled him with sudden certainty. Emily. Margaret wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked toward the door. Daniel followed close behind. When the door opened, cold air rushed into the cabin. And there she was. Emily stood under the porch light, soaked from the rain. Her hair clung to her face. Her hands trembled. And her eyes were red from crying. Daniel's chest tightened painfully at the sight of her. Relief. Shock. Guilt. All crashing together at once. Emily stepped inside slowly, looking uncertain. I'm sorry, she whispered. Her voice barely audible. I didn't want us to end the night like that. She explained that she had been driving around trying to calm down. But the storm kept getting worse. And eventually the fear of losing him had become stronger than the anger. Daniel listened quietly. Every word struck deep, because he had felt the exact same fears. Margaret quietly excused herself to make tea, giving them space. Now Daniel and Emily stood alone near the fire. The rain softened outside. Emily looked at him nervously. I feel like I'm not enough sometimes, she admitted. Hearing those words broke something inside him. Because he had believed the opposite. I thought you were drifting away from me, he confessed. They both stared at each other, realizing the truth. Neither of them had stopped loving the other. They had simply stopped saying what they were afraid to say. Emily's tears returned. But this time they were mixed with relief. Margaret returned with warm tea, and watched them quietly. Then she revealed the truth she had been holding. Emily had been asking her mother for advice, trying to figure out how to reconnect with Daniel, trying to find a way to bring warmth back into their marriage. She had never stopped loving him. Not for a moment. The realization washed over Daniel like warmth. Their marriage wasn't broken. It had simply been waiting for honesty. They spent hours talking beside the fireplace. About fears. About stress. About the quiet ways life had slowly pulled them apart. By morning, the storm had faded into a gentle drizzle. Daniel stepped outside into the fresh air. Moments later Emily joined him. She slipped her hand into his. Just like she used to. I don't want us to go back to how things were, she said softly. I want us to be better. Daniel squeezed her hand. So do I. They walked back inside the cabin where Margaret was already making coffee. She smiled when she saw them together. Not surprised. Just quietly proud. Because sometimes love doesn't disappear when things get difficult. Sometimes it simply waits. For two people brave enough to speak the truth. And as Daniel and Emily drove home later that morning, sunlight breaking through the clouds, both of them understood something they hadn't understood before. Love doesn't survive because life is easy. Love survives because two people decide, again and again, that the other person is worth fighting for. Even in the middle of the storm,